His wife poured boiling water on him in front of 60 people, and she had no idea she had just signed the death warrant on everything her family had spent 40 years building. This is the story of a quiet man who spent 5 years being treated like a footnote in his own marriage, dismissed at dinner tables, mocked at church functions, introduced to powerful people as nobody worth remembering. His wife's family had money, status, and a $10 billion business deal they had been engineering for a decade. They had everything, or so they believed. What they did not have, or what they never thought to look for, was the one signature that could make that deal live or die. And the man whose name was on it had been sitting at their dinner table the entire time. One act of cruelty committed in public, in front of deacons and business partners and 60 witnesses who would remember it. That was the moment his wife's family ran out of time. The question is not whether they lost everything. The question is how precisely, how completely, and how quietly one man took it all apart, without raising his voice once. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because this channel runs deep every single week. And if this story already has you locked in, drop a like before we even get started. We want to know where you're watching from today. Drop your city in the comments right now. People are checking in from everywhere and we love to see it. Now let me take you back to where this all started. A Sunday evening, a church gala, and a manila envelope that one man hadn't opened yet, pressed against his chest like a secret the whole room was standing on top of without knowing it. The Founders Gala at Wells Chapel, AME, had been a Memphis institution for 31 years, and the Frost family had sponsored it for 22 of them. That was not a fact anyone at the event was allowed to forget. The ballroom attached to the church fellowship hall had been transformed with white linen, amber candlelight, and flower arrangements that Simone had personally approved 3 weeks prior. The deacons wore their best suits, the women wore their Sunday perfume on a Sunday evening, which meant they wore twice as much of it. Gospel played softly from a speaker near the entrance, not the jubilant kind, but the slow, orchestral kind that said money was present and wanted to be acknowledged. Raymond Delaney stood at the edge of Aldrich Frost's table in a charcoal suit he had owned for 4 years and still wore well. He was not uncomfortable. He had learned, somewhere in the last 5 years, how to stand in a room that did not fully claim him and still hold himself like he belonged there. Aldrich was in the middle of a story when Raymond arrived at the table. He did not stop it. When he finally finished, he gestured loosely in Raymond's direction without turning to face him fully. He said, "This is my daughter's husband," and then he returned his attention to the 2 men across the table, both of them investors in the Frost & Sons expansion project, both of them in suits that cost more than Raymond's monthly take-home salary. No name, no profession, no further acknowledgement. Raymond pulled out his chair and sat down. One of the investors, a heavy-set man named Gerald with a gold watch and a habit of talking with his hands, looked at Raymond with the particular brand of polite disinterest reserved for people deemed socially irrelevant. He asked, in the way people ask questions they do not intend to remember the answers to, what Raymond did for work. Aldrich answered before Raymond could open his mouth. He said, "Raymond is in education," and he said the word education the way some men say the word hobby. The table moved on. Simone, seated 2 chairs down, did not look up from her phone. Raymond reached for his glass of water and drank from it slowly. It was somewhere between the salad course and the main that Pastor Wendell Hayes appeared at Raymond's shoulder, quiet as a deacon delivering an offering plate. He leaned down close and said he needed a word, just a moment, nothing urgent, but important. Raymond excused himself without ceremony, and no one at the table acknowledged that he had spoken. The vestibule was cooler than the ballroom and smelled like old wood and candle wax and the specific kind of peace that old black churches hold in their walls whether anyone is praying or not. Pastor Hayes led Raymond to the small table near the coat rack where envelopes of donation money were sometimes counted after service. He reached into the inside pocket of his robe and produced a manila envelope, thick and slightly worn at the corners, sealed with a strip of clear tape across the back. He set it on the table between them and placed one hand briefly on top of it, the way you touch something before you let it go. He said that James Whitmore, Earl Delaney's attorney down in Memphis, had been trying to locate Raymond for 14 months. He said the estate was ready to be settled and that Whitmore had asked him personally to make sure Raymond received this. He said he was sorry it had taken so long to find the right moment. Raymond looked at the envelope for a moment without touching it. Then he picked it up, slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, and told Pastor Hayes, "Thank you," in the quiet, complete way he said most things. He walked back into the ballroom. He had been gone less than 4 minutes, but Simone had been counting every one of them. She did not wait for him to sit down before she spoke. Her voice carried just enough, not shouting but projected, aimed, calibrated to reach the ears of every person at the surrounding tables without appearing to try. She asked him where he had been. She said she was sitting there looking foolish while he was off somewhere doing God knows what. She said this was her family's event, and the least he could do was be present for it. Raymond sat down. He said he had been speaking with Pastor Hayes. She asked about what. He said it was nothing that needed to be discussed right now. That was the wrong answer, or rather, it was the honest answer, which in that moment functioned as the wrong one. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Simone reached across the table, lifted Raymond's untouched cup of hot apple cider, and poured it in a slow, deliberate arc down the back of his neck and across his collar. She said, "Next time remember who brought you here." The table went silent. Not just their table. The 2 tables on either side went quiet as well, the way a room holds its breath when something crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. Gerald, with the gold watch, stared. Aldrich did not move. Marcus, seated further down, covered a smirk with his water glass. Raymond sat very still. He reached for his dinner napkin and pressed it against the back of his neck without urgency. He blotted his collar. He set the napkin back down across his lap and folded it once, neatly, the way you fold something you intend to set aside. He looked up, found Pastor Hayes across the room, and gave him a single, slow nod. Then he pressed his right hand flat against the front of his jacket, against the place where the envelope rested against his chest, and he left it there. He did not speak for the rest of the evening. He did not need to. That Sunday night, Raymond drove home alone. Simone stayed behind at the gala with her family, which was the usual arrangement after events like these. She would ride with her father, laugh with her brother, drink another glass of wine, and arrive home sometime after 11, smelling like someone else's perfume and her mother's idea of success. Raymond had stopped waiting up for her 2 years ago. He parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark for a long time. He did not open the envelope. Not yet. He pressed his hand flat against his jacket pocket, felt the weight of it, and then he went inside, poured himself a glass of water, and went to bed. But the story of that evening did not begin at the gala. It began 5 years earlier, in a different city, with a different version of Raymond Delaney. Before the chalk dust and the JV basketball practices and the Sunday dinners where nobody asked his name, Raymond had been a financial analyst at a consulting firm in Atlanta. He had worn better suits then. He had carried a briefcase and attended quarterly presentations and spoken in rooms where people wrote down what he said. He had been good at the work, genuinely good, the kind of good that gets noticed. And then, at 33, something in him had simply declined to continue. It was not a breakdown, it was a decision. He had looked at the next 20 years of that life and chosen differently, the way a man steps off a path, not because he is lost, but because he can see clearly where the path ends. He got his teaching certification. He moved to Memphis. He started over in a classroom with 27 ninth graders who needed someone patient and serious, to teach them about the world that had already decided what to do with them. He found, to his own quiet surprise, that he loved it. He met Simone at a church function 18 months later. She was luminous and sharp and laughed at things that were actually funny, which was rarer than it should have been. He did not know in those early months that her warmth was a performance that ran on an audience. He did not know that the version of Simone he was falling in love with required a crowd to exist. He learned. Aldrich Frost made his position clear at the engagement dinner. He did not make a speech or issue a warning. He simply talked about his own accomplishments for 45 minutes, mentioned Frost and Sons no fewer than 11 times, and addressed Raymond directly only once to ask, with the particular smile of a man who already has the answer, what Raymond's 5-year financial plan looked like. Raymond said he planned to keep teaching. Aldrich nodded, slowly, and turned back to his dinner. Marcus Frost was more direct. He was 38 years old and had never fully outgrown the version of himself that peaked at 19, which meant he wielded cruelty the way insecure men do, as entertainment disguised as humor, delivered with an audience present. He started calling Raymond the substitute teacher at the second family dinner and had never found a reason to stop. The first real incident happened 14 months into the marriage. It was a Sunday dinner at the Frost family home. Pot roast and sweet potatoes, and a peach cobbler that Aldrich's housekeeper made from scratch every week. Aldrich's business partners were present, the same rotating cast of investors and contractors who treated the Frost dining room like a second office. One of them asked about Simone's husband, and Marcus answered before anyone else could. Said Raymond taught high school history and coached JV ball, said it the way you describe a child's hobby. The table laughed. Simone smiled. Raymond passed the bread rolls and said nothing. The second incident happened at a church fundraiser 6 months later. Aldrich stood at the podium and thanked his family by name: Simone, Marcus, his late wife's sister, even the housekeeper. Raymond was present. Raymond was not mentioned. He sat in the third pew and listened, and folded his program into a neat rectangle and set it on his knee. The third was the worst, and the most recent before the gala. It was Christmas Eve. The family had exchanged gifts in the front room, and Marcus had given Raymond a gift card to a grocery chain, the cheap kind you buy at the register, with $25 loaded on it. He had handed it over with a broad grin and said, "Figured this was about your speed." The room had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something has gone too far, and no one wants to be the one to say so. Simone had looked at the floor. Aldrich had cleared his throat and changed the subject. Raymond had thanked Marcus, genuinely, looked him in the eye and said he appreciated it. That was the thing about Raymond that none of them understood. His silence was not the silence of a man with nothing to say. It was the silence of a man who had decided long ago that the arena they wanted him to fight in was not worth the energy. He was not suppressing anger. He was conserving it for something he could not yet name. At 3:45 on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 days after the gala, Raymond sat at his desk in an empty classroom while the last of the afternoon light came through the windows in long orange strips across the student desks. He had a stack of essays to grade, his junior class, a unit on Reconstruction. He had a red pen, he had a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and that he kept drinking anyway. The room smelled like pencil shavings and old textbooks and something close to peace. No one from the Frost family had ever been inside this room. They did not know its number, they did not know which hall it was on. This room was the one place in Raymond Delaney's life that belonged entirely to him, and he moved through it with the quiet authority of a man on his own ground. He picked up the first essay. He read the first paragraph. He made a note in the margin in his careful, unhurried hand. 6 weeks earlier, while Raymond had been sitting at this same desk, His phone had rung with a number he had not dialed in years. He had stared at it for a moment, then answered. The voice on the other end had been careful and deliberate, in the way of old men who have spent their lives handling other people's important things. James Whitmore had been Earl Delaney's attorney for 30 years, and he had been trying to locate Raymond since Earl passed 14 months ago. He said the estate was nearly settled. He said Raymond needed to come to Memphis, in person, when he was ready. He said there were documents that required his attention. Raymond had said he would come after the gala. He had hung up and gone back to his grading. But before that phone call, before Raymond had a reason to think about Memphis, or estate documents, or his estranged father's final arrangements, the Frost family had made their most decisive move. They had asked him to sign a postnuptial agreement, and Raymond Delaney, without any visible hesitation, had signed it. The meeting had taken place in the office of Barrett Holloway, the Frost family's attorney of 20 years. The office was downtown on the 14th floor of a building with a lobby designed to make visitors feel small. Barrett Holloway was the kind of lawyer who wore cufflinks on a Wednesday and arranged his face into a permanent expression of patient condescension. Aldrich sat at the head of the conference table. Marcus sat to his right, doing nothing to conceal his enjoyment. Simone sat across from Raymond and spent the entire meeting looking at her phone. The agreement was 41 pages. Barrett Holloway summarized it in 4 sentences. Raymond waived all claims to marital assets. He waived all claims to any inheritance Simone might receive from the Frost estate. He waived any interest in Frost-adjacent business ventures, present or future. He acknowledged that his contributions to the marital household were domestic in nature and not financial. Raymond read every page. He read slowly, which visibly irritated Aldrich. Marcus checked his watch twice. Barrett Holloway offered water that Raymond declined. When Raymond reached page 37, he looked up and asked, in a voice that gave away nothing, whether the agreement covered assets he had brought into the marriage independently. Barrett Holloway blinked. He said the agreement was standard and comprehensive and covered all marital assets. Raymond nodded once and looked back down at the page. Aldrich said with the air of a man closing a door that Raymond was not bringing anything into anything. Marcus laughed. It was a short, sharp sound like something hitting a floor. Raymond signed the document on page 41. He dated it. He capped the pen and slid both the pen and the document back across the table. He thanked Barrett Holloway for his time and stood up. On the drive home, he pulled out his phone at a red light and found the number for James Whitmore. He made the call. Whitmore answered on the second ring. Raymond told him he would be coming to Memphis 3 days after the upcoming gala on a Monday morning. He asked Whitmore to have everything ready. Whitmore said he would have everything ready. That night Aldrich called Marcus and told him with great satisfaction that the matter had been handled. He said Raymond was exactly what he had always appeared to be. He said that man would never be a problem. Marcus agreed. Neither of them slept poorly that night. Neither of them had any reason to. The drive to Memphis took 2 hours and 20 minutes on a Monday morning, and Raymond made it alone, with the radio off. He had told Simone he had errands to run. She had not asked what kind. That was the texture of their marriage by then. She did not ask, and he did not explain, and the space between them had grown so wide and so familiar that neither of them noticed it any more. He parked on a quiet block, just off Union Avenue, in front of a narrow brick building, with a brass plate beside the door that read, Whitmore and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Established, 1974. The building was old and solid and smelled when Raymond pushed open the front door, like wood polish and old paper and the particular quiet of a place that has handled serious things for a very long time. James Whitmore met him in the hallway. He was 71 years old and built like a man who had never been in a hurry in his life, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a handshake that lasted exactly the right amount of time. He had known Earl Delaney since before Raymond was born. He said so at the door. He said he was glad Raymond had finally come. He led Raymond into a corner office where the blinds were half drawn against the morning light, and the desk between them held two things, a thick manila folder and the envelope that Raymond had been carrying in his jacket pocket for 3 days. Raymond had left it sealed until this morning. He had placed it on the desk in front of him when he sat down, and now Whitmore opened it himself with the careful hands of a man who understood the weight of what he was handling. He began with the land. Earl Delaney had spent 40 years acquiring industrial parcels in and around Memphis, buying quietly, paying in full, never borrowing against what he owned. He had no taste for debt and no patience for partners. By the time he died, the Delaney holdings comprised 340 acres of contiguous, industrial-zoned land in the Fraser Corridor. Land that sat, Whitmore said carefully, directly beneath the proposed northern route of the Frost & Sons logistics expansion. Raymond did not move. Whitmore said the most recent independent appraisal, completed 8 months ago, had valued the portfolio at $870 million. The room was very quiet. Whitmore pulled the LLC formation documents from the folder. He explained that Earl had not simply left Raymond the land. He had structured the inheritance deliberately, incorporating the holdings as Delaney Land Trust, LLC, under Tennessee state law, with a single officer on record. Earl had chosen the structure specifically, Whitmore said, because he wanted his son to have authority, not just assets. He wanted Raymond to have a title, a nameplate, something that could not be dismissed. He turned the certificate of formation to face Raymond across the desk. The officer's title read Chief Executive Officer. The officer's name read Raymond A. Delaney. Raymond looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then Whitmore set a second document on top of it. He said that over the last 36 months, 3 separate limited liability companies had submitted acquisition offers on the Delaney parcels through a land brokerage firm operating out of Nashville. The offers had gone unanswered because the estate had not yet been settled and the trust had no active officer to respond. Whitmore had begun tracing the ownership of those 3 LLCs 8 months ago when the offers became more aggressive. He had traced them all the way back to Frost & Sons Textile and Logistics. Raymond looked up from the certificate. He asked Whitmore to confirm what he had just said. Whitmore slid a corporate registration document across the desk. It showed the registered agent for all 3 acquisition LLCs as the same Nashville law firm. It showed the parent company on file as Frost & Sons Holdings, a subsidiary of Frost & Sons Textile and Logistics, Memphis, Tennessee. Raymond picked up the document. He read it. He set it back down. He sat with that information for a long time, long enough that Whitmore did not try to fill the silence. The old attorney understood that some things required a moment to settle, the way a structure has to settle after the ground beneath it shifts. What Raymond was processing was not just the money, it was not just the land, it was the geometry of it, the specific, almost impossible geometry of what his life had actually been for the last 5 years. He had been sitting at Aldrich Frost's dinner table, eating pot roast and absorbing contempt, while Aldrich spent millions of dollars and 3 years of corporate strategy trying to find the man who owned the only land standing between him and his legacy. The man had been there every Sunday. Whitmore finally spoke. He asked Raymond what he wanted to do. Raymond was quiet for another moment. Then he asked one question. He asked how long he had before the Frost expansion deal was scheduled to close. Whitmore said 90 days, maximum. The anchor investor had a contractual deadline and Frost & Sons was already behind schedule on the land acquisition phase. Raymond nodded once. He reached across the desk and picked up the LLC certificate of formation. He read his own name, he read his own title. He folded the document once, carefully, along its original crease and slid it back into the envelope. He stood up, thanked James Whitmore, and shook his hand. He walked out through the hallway that smelled like wood polish and serious things, and he pushed through the front door into the Memphis morning, and he stood on the sidewalk for exactly 10 seconds. Then he walked to his car. The slow burn was over. Raymond did not go back to Memphis empty-handed. He went back with a question, a timeline, and a name that Whitmore had written on a note card before Raymond left the office. Cheryl Odoms, Odoms and Associates, Land Use and Property Law. Whitmore had said she was the best in Memphis for what Raymond needed. He said she was thorough, she was fast, and she did not leak. Raymond had folded the note card into his shirt pocket and driven back to the city with the windows down and the radio still off. He called Odoms from the school parking lot the next morning before first bell. She answered on the second ring. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Madison Avenue, clean and uncluttered, with a wall of Tennessee land use statutes lined up in matching binders along a shelf behind her desk. Cheryl Odoms was 52 years old and spoke the way experienced attorneys speak when they have stopped needing to impress anyone, directly, precisely, without ornament. She had reviewed the Delaney Trust documents overnight after Raymond's call and had 3 pages of notes waiting for him when he sat down. She told him what he already suspected, but needed confirmed in legal language. The formal ownership notice issued on Delaney Land Trust LLC letterhead and signed by the Trust's registered chief executive officer would accomplish 3 things simultaneously. First, it would void all prior acquisition approaches made through shell companies or third-party brokers because those approaches had been directed at an estate in probate rather than an active corporate entity. Second, it would place Frost & Sons' acquisition team on official notice that the parcels were under executive management and unavailable for purchase. Third, because Meridian Infrastructure Fund had an active financial commitment tied to the expansion project, Tennessee disclosure law required that any material change to the land acquisition status be formally communicated to all parties with a financial stake in the deal. In plain terms, one letter would pull the rug out from under the entire project, and Raymond would not have to make a single phone call to the Frost family to do it. Raymond sat across from her and listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he told her what he wanted. He said he did not want press involvement. He did not want leaks, speculation, or any contact with the Frost family directly. He wanted everything executed through proper legal channels only, documented at every step, nothing informal. Odoms nodded and said that was exactly how she preferred to work. She said she could have the draft notice ready in 5 days. Raymond said that was fine. He thanked her and stood up to leave, and then he paused at the door and turned back. He told her one more thing. He said the people on the receiving end of this notice were going to be surprised, and that when they were surprised, they were going to start looking for someone to blame and something to negotiate. He asked her to make sure the notice was written in language that left no room for either. Odoms looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. She said she would make sure of it. 5 days later, Raymond sat in the same chair across from the same desk and read the draft notice line by line. It was 4 pages on Delaney Land Trust, LLC letterhead, formal and exact and cold as a deed filing. It named the 3 shell companies by their registered LLC numbers. It cited the Tennessee statutes governing active ownership notification. It voided all prior acquisition correspondence by reference to specific dates and offer amounts. At the bottom was a signature line, Raymond A. Delaney, Chief Executive Officer, Delaney Land Trust, LLC. Raymond read it once more. Then he picked up the pen and signed his name in the same careful, unhurried hand he used to write margin notes on student essays. Odoms submitted the certified notice the following Tuesday morning, dispatched simultaneously by certified mail and electronic delivery to the Legal Counsel of Frost & Sons Textile and Logistics and to the Legal Counsel of Meridian Infrastructure Fund in Chicago. The delivery confirmation for Frost & Sons came back at 9:14 in the morning. Raymond was in 3rd period when it arrived. He was at the board, walking his juniors through the Compromise of 1877, drawing a timeline in chalk that stretched from one end of the board to the other. He had 23 students in front of him and a lesson plan that had nothing to do with land trusts or shell companies or men who had spent 3 years trying to find him. He finished the lesson. He collected the exit tickets at the door. He walked to the gym for afternoon practice and ran his team through defensive rotations for 90 minutes until the last of the light was gone from the high windows. He drove home, made a plate of rice and smothered chicken, and ate at the kitchen table alone. Simone had called that evening. He answered. She talked about a weekend trip she wanted to take to Nashville with her cousins, and whether Raymond had any objections. He said he did not. She hung up. He washed his plate. He graded 4 essays. He went to bed. Somewhere across the city, in a building with an acquisition team and a $10 billion timeline, a certified envelope sat on a desk. It had already been signed for. It was already too late. The envelope landed on Darren Pickford's desk at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. Pickford was Frost & Sons Director of Acquisitions, a precise, humorless man who had spent 11 years managing the land components of Aldrich's expansion projects. He opened the certified envelope, read the first paragraph, and went still. He read it again. Then he picked up his phone and called Aldrich directly. Aldrich was in a breakfast meeting when the call came through. He stepped out, listened to Pickford summarize the notice, and told him it was probably a clerical issue with the probate process. He said to forward it to Barrett Holloway and let the attorneys sort it out. Then Pickford read him the name on the signature line. Raymond A. Delaney, Chief Executive Officer, Delaney Land Trust, LLC. The silence on Aldrich's end lasted 4 full seconds. He told Pickford he would call him back. He did not call him back. He called Barrett Holloway directly, and Holloway spent 2 hours pulling corporate registration records and cross-referencing the LLC documentation against the probate file his office had been monitoring. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Holloway called Aldrich and confirmed what the notice already said. The trust was real. The CEO designation was valid. The acquisition attempts through the shell companies had been directed at an estate in probate, which meant they had no legal standing, which meant 3 years of strategy had produced nothing. Nothing except a paper trail with Frost & Sons' name on it. Aldrich sat in his office for a long time after that call. By Wednesday morning, Meridian Infrastructure Fund's legal team in Chicago had reviewed the ownership notice, flagged the material change in acquisition viability, and issued a formal closing suspension. The $400 million commitment was withdrawn by noon. One sentence in their notification letter said it plainly: the fund could not maintain a financial commitment to a project whose critical land acquisition phase had no viable path to completion. Aldrich's expansion timeline did not slow down. It did not stall. It collapsed. He called his personal banker that afternoon. The conversation was short and devastating. The Germantown estate purchase, 6,000 square feet in the best zip code in Shelby County, a property Aldrich had told his friends about at 3 separate dinners, a property Simone had already picked furniture for, had been financed against the projected proceeds of the expansion deal. The margin call was now active, $6.8 million due within 30 days. Aldrich did not have $6.8 million in accessible liquidity. He had assets. He had receivables. He did not have cash. The banker expressed his regrets in the tone of a man who had delivered this kind of news before. Marcus Frost heard about the Meridian withdrawal before his father told him. He had a contact at the fund's Chicago office. He called Simone before he called anyone else. He did not ask questions. He issued a command. He told her to get her husband under control. He said Raymond had filed some kind of legal notice through a land trust that it had killed the Meridian deal and that their father was now in a very serious financial position. He said Simone needed to fix it. Simone did not understand what a land trust was. She did not know what a chief executive officer designation meant in the context of a property LLC. She did not know her husband had driven to Memphis 3 weeks ago and walked into an attorney's office. She called Raymond. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was the same as it always was, unhurried even like still water. She told him that Marcus had called, that something was happening with a land trust, and his name was on some kind of legal notice, and that it was affecting her father's business. Raymond listened. She asked him what was going on. He said he would explain when the time was right. She said the time was right now. He said he would talk to her soon. And then, gently, he ended the call. By Thursday morning, the Memphis Business Journal had the story. The headline ran above the fold in the digital edition: Frost & Sons expansion stalls as mystery land trust blocks key parcels. The article named the Delaney Land Trust LLC, noted the withdrawal of the Meridian infrastructure commitment, and described the 3-year shell company acquisition strategy as having failed to locate the trust's ownership before the estate was settled. Aldrich's phone began ringing before 8 in the morning. His board members called, his contractors called. 2 of the investors from the gala, Gerald with the gold watch and a man named Preston who had driven up from Jackson, called within the same hour. They did not leave voicemails, they called again. Aldrich answered none of them. Simone went to Beale Street that afternoon. She needed to get out of the house. She went to the boutique on the corner, the small one with the good candles and the jewellery in the window that she had been going to for 4 years. The owner, a woman named Claudette, greeted her the way she always did, warmly, carefully. Simone selected 3 items. She brought them to the counter. Claudette ran the card. It was declined. Simone asked her to try it again. Claudette tried it again, declined. The 2 women looked at each other across the counter. Claudette said nothing. She did not need to. 6 months earlier, in this exact store, Simone had told Claudette, loudly, casually, as if it were a fact as unremarkable as the weather, that Raymond Delaney would never amount to anything. Simone left the boutique without the items. That evening, Aldrich Frost got into his car and drove toward the school where his son-in-law taught history to 9th graders. He was going to offer a deal. He was going to be reasonable. He was going to remind Raymond who he was dealing with and make clear that there were consequences to this kind of disruption. He had no idea that Raymond had been waiting for this visit since the morning he signed that notice. Aldrich Frost had never been inside a public school building as an adult. That fact was visible on him the moment he walked through the door. The slight tightening around his jaw, the way his eyes moved across the hallway, like a man cataloguing everything that confirmed his lowest expectations. Marcus was beside him. Simone arrived 3 minutes later, alone, having driven separately without telling either of them she was coming. Raymond was at his desk when the first knock came. He had been expecting it since Tuesday morning. He called out for them to come in, set down his pen, and folded his hands on the desk in front of him. He did not stand up. The 3 of them arranged themselves in the room, the way people do when they haven't agreed on a formation. Aldrich at the front, Marcus slightly behind and to the right, Simone near the door with her arms crossed and her eyes on the floor. The afternoon light came through the windows in long, flat strips across the student desks. The rooms smelled like chalk and old wood and everything Raymond had built in the years they had refused to see him. Aldrich began immediately. He said there had clearly been a misunderstanding about the nature of the land trust and that he was prepared to make Raymond a very reasonable offer. He laid it out in the confident cadence of a man accustomed to closing deals. A licensing arrangement, a revenue share tied to the expansion's first-year earnings, and a seat on an advisory board for Frost & Sons that would come with a formal stipend. He said these were generous terms. He said he hoped Raymond could see that. Raymond let him finish, every word, every clause, every implication that this was still a situation Aldrich could shape with money and framing. Raymond let all of it land in the room and settle, and then he stood up slowly, walked to the classroom door, and closed it. He turned back to face them. He said he wanted to take them through something, and he asked them to listen carefully because he was only going to say it once. He started with the shell companies. He named all 3 of them: Ridgeway Land Partners, LLC, Cornerstone Acquisition Group, LLC, and a third operating out of a registered agent address in Nashville under the name Crestfield Property Holdings, LLC. He explained that all three had been traced through corporate registration filings back to Frost & Sons Holdings. He said that those three companies had submitted acquisition offers on the Delaney parcels 14 times over 36 months. Not once, 14 times. He said he had documentation of every single one. Marcus started to speak. Raymond looked at him, not quickly, not sharply, but with the deliberate slowness of a man who has decided exactly how much weight to give a moment, and said his name. Marcus Frost. Just that. 2 words, said the way you say something you have been waiting to say for a long time. Marcus closed his mouth. Raymond turned to Simone. He told her that 6 weeks before the gala, her family's attorney had asked him to sign a postnuptial agreement. He said he had read it carefully. He said that on page 37, the agreement contained language waiving his rights to any assets he had brought independently into the marriage. He said that Barrett Holloway had dismissed his question about that language as irrelevant. He said Aldrich had laughed. He let that sit for a moment. Then he told her what the postnuptial was actually designed to do. Her family had been running an acquisition strategy targeting land they did not know he owned. At some point, someone in Frost & Sons' legal structure had begun to suspect that the mystery owner of the Delaney parcels might have a connection to their family. The postnuptial was an attempt to close that gap, to strip Raymond of any claim to trust-adjacent assets before he could ever discover what those assets were. Simone's expression changed. It did not collapse all at once. It shifted the way understanding shifts when it arrives slowly, and then all at once, her eyes moving from Raymond to her father, and her father's face giving her the answer she needed before he said a word. Aldrich said that was not what the agreement was for. Raymond said he knew. He said the agreement had not protected them from anything because it referenced no Delaney assets by name. It had been drafted in ignorance of what it was actually trying to reach, which meant it was useless. He reached into the folder on his desk and placed the LLC certificate of formation on the nearest student desk, facing outward, so all three of them could see it. He said he wanted to be direct with them now. He said he had spent 5 years at their dinner table. He had been introduced to their business partners as nobody. He had been mocked at church functions, dismissed at family gatherings, and handed a $25 gift card at Christmas while the table laughed. He said he had absorbed every single one of those moments in silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was waiting for the moment when saying it would mean something. He said that moment was now. He said, "You told 60 people at that table who brought me here, Simone. But what you didn't know was that every acre your father needed, every dollar he promised his board, every dream he spent a decade engineering, all of it was sitting underneath my name, CEO. The title was on the paperwork before I ever walked through your family's door. The room was absolutely still. Aldrich's composure, which had held through the shell company names and the postnuptial explanation and the LLC certificate, finally broke. His face did something complicated and private, and not entirely dignified. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. Marcus said nothing. He was looking at the floor. Simone's arms dropped from their crossed position. She looked at Raymond the way you look at someone when you realize, too late, that you never looked at them at all. She started to speak. Raymond reached over and picked up the LLC certificate from the desk. He held it up once, briefly, so she could see it clearly. Her name was not on it. It had never been on it. There was nothing to negotiate, nothing to appeal to, and nothing left to say. He walked to the classroom door and opened it. He stood beside it and waited. They left without a deal. They left without a word. Aldrich went first, then Marcus, then Simone, who paused for one moment at the threshold and looked back. Raymond had already returned to his desk. He picked up the essay on top of the stack, uncapped his pen, and began to read the first paragraph. He did not watch them go. The Frosts left Raymond's classroom without a deal, without a plan, and without the one thing they had walked in believing they still possessed: leverage. What followed happened without Raymond lifting another finger. Frost & Sons announced the official abandonment of the Northern Expansion project 6 weeks after the classroom meeting. The press release used careful language about strategic realignment and evolving market conditions, the kind of language companies use when the truth is too damaging to say plainly. The Memphis Business Journal was not fooled. Neither was anyone else who had been watching the company's filings. To cover the margin call and service the debt that had accumulated during 3 years of failed acquisition strategy, Frost & Sons sold 2 of its regional divisions, its Mid-South distribution arm and its East Tennessee textile subsidiary, at prices that people in the industry described, quietly and with a particular kind of satisfaction, as distressed. The combined sale generated enough to stop the bleeding. It did not generate enough to restore what had been lost. Aldrich Frost did not get his Germantown estate. The property was relisted on the market 40 days after the margin call was triggered, and the listing noted in plain terms that the seller had been unable to complete the original purchase. That detail was picked up by a real estate column in the same business journal that had run the expansion headline. Aldrich's name appeared in both articles. His phone, which had once rung with people eager to be associated with him, grew quieter by the week. Marcus Frost filed for personal bankruptcy 4 months after the classroom meeting. His side ventures, 3 of them, all leveraged against the anticipated growth of Frost & Sons' expanded footprint, had no foundation once the expansion died. They collapsed in sequence, like buildings whose support walls had been quietly removed. The filing was public record. Several people from Wells Chapel AME saw it. Word traveled the way word always travels in communities where reputation is currency. Simone filed for divorce in the 5th month. Raymond did not contest it. He retained Cheryl Odoms to review the filing and confirmed what he had already known. The postnuptial agreement her family had celebrated signing, the document that was supposed to strip Raymond of everything, had been drafted in such specific reference to Frost-adjacent assets that it covered nothing in the Delaney Land Trust, not a single parcel, not $1. Barrett Holloway had written an airtight agreement to protect against the wrong man. The divorce was finalized without a prolonged fight. Raymond walked out of it exactly as he had walked into the marriage, with everything that was his intact. He kept teaching. This was the part that people in the neighborhood found hardest to understand when the story eventually made its quiet rounds through the community. A man sitting on $870 million in land assets, going back to third period on a Monday morning to teach the Compromise of 1877 to 9th graders who were still figuring out how to take notes. But those who knew Raymond well, Pastor Hayes, a few colleagues who had always seen him clearly, understood that the classroom was not a consolation prize. It had never been. It was the life he had chosen, and he had always chosen it on purpose. 6 months after the confrontation, Delaney Land Trust LLC entered into a lease agreement with a Memphis-based black-owned logistics cooperative called Southbound Freight Partners, offering 2 parcels along the Fraser Corridor at 40% below market rate. The cooperative had been trying to expand for 3 years and had been priced out of every negotiation. Raymond's terms made it possible. The day the lease was signed, Southbound's founder, a man named Clifton Graves, who had started the company in his brother's garage, called Raymond and said he didn't know how to thank him. Raymond told him to hire locally and pay his people well. That was sufficient. Raymond also endowed a scholarship at his school through the trust. 5 awards annually, each worth $12,000, for graduating seniors pursuing careers in urban planning, land law, or public history. He named it the Earl Delaney Memorial Scholarship. He did not make a public announcement. He told the principal, who told the counselors, and the first 5 recipients found out the same way students usually find out good news. Quietly, in a letter when they needed it most. It was on a Wednesday afternoon in early November, 6 weeks after the scholarship was announced, that Dana Price stopped Raymond in the hallway outside the faculty workroom. She taught 8th grade English 3 doors down from his classroom. She had known him for 3 years and had always greeted him by name, which in the context of his recent history meant more than she knew. She asked if he would like to have dinner on Saturday. Raymond looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled. Genuinely, the kind of smile that comes from a place that has finally been allowed to rest. He said yes. That is where this story ends. Not with a press conference or a celebration or a moment designed for an audience. It ends with a man standing at his classroom window on a Thursday afternoon, watching his JV team run defensive drills on the court below, the gym echoing with the particular noise of young people being coached into something better than they were yesterday. Behind his desk, framed in simple black and hung level with the whiteboard, was the manila envelope, still sealed on the outside. The world it had opened was visible everywhere else. There is a lesson in Raymond Delaney's story, and it is not complicated. It is this: the people who dismiss you, who erase your name from rooms you walked into with them, who pour contempt over you in public and call it honesty, those people are making a decision about who they think you are. Raymond never argued with their decision. He simply waited for the moment when the facts could speak for themselves. The facts spoke, loudly, permanently, without Raymond raising his voice once. Now, what would you have done in Raymond's position? Would you have confronted the Frost family the moment you found out, or would you have been patient enough to let it play out the way Raymond did? Drop your answer in the comments. This is exactly the kind of conversation this community shows up for. If this story held you from beginning to end, do us a favor and hit that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it helps more people find stories like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time, because there is another story coming that is going to make this one feel like a warm-up. You do not want to miss it. We will see you in the next one.